Hi, welcome to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today at University Bookstore is the books editor of The Stranger, Paul Constant. Paul, so glad you could come by today.
Yeah, so glad to be here. Thanks for asking me.
I don't even know where The Stranger's offices are.
We're on Capitol Hill.
Oh.
For a while longer. We might be pushed out for a condo, and then who knows? So, yeah, we'll see.
Well, I wanted to talk to you. When I had the brilliant idea of asking you to be on the show, I had just become extremely frustrated with the book reviews that I was reading in such notable places as the New York Times Sunday Book Review. And it occurred to me when I was reading the New York Times Book Review that I didn't know who they were writing those book reviews for, but it didn't seem to me that they were writing them for a reader. And so I thought, well, who would be better to talk about book reviews than you? I mean, you're local, we could just sit and chat about it. So what's the purpose, in your mind, what is the purpose of a book review?
Wow. A book review can be a lot of things, and that's what I enjoy about them. I've been at The Stranger full-time for 7 years now, and I do at least one book review a week, usually a little more. And I don't know if they all have one purpose in mind. Sometimes, you know, the especially catty ones, I think, the writer often thinks of them as an intervention for an author. I've written a couple of those where I had hoped that an author I respected would maybe read it and put the brakes on some, you know, laziness that was encroaching into their career and things like that.
Let me just interrupt for a second.
Sure.
So those catty ones, I've always found that those negative ones are the easiest to write.
Yeah, and for first-time book reviewers, it's the ones they love to write,
right.
Because you get a better response online. You know, you get more fun comments. People are more likely to share it on Twitter and Facebook because you're mean, and you know, mean travels fast. It's not especially deep, but the negative ones are easier to write. The positive ones, and I found in my time at The Stranger, are more rewarding, and they last longer, and they affect more readers. I think they just go much further, not as fast. So it's something that you learn. You know, sometimes I'll read a takedown, and I'll be like, oh, you're just starting out, kid.
Yeah,
you know, good for you. Right. Get it out of your system, and then let's see what you can really do. I'm sure every book reviewer would have a different answer, but I think that when I write a book review, I try to write for the entire city of Seattle. Sometimes just anybody who can read it in English, but a lot of the time I'm just sort of introducing books to stranger readers who vary from, you know, high school kids who I've met and who are very intelligent and wonderful, and all the way up to, you know, Sherman Alexie, I think, reads The Stranger every week. So it's a very broad audience. One of the great things about my job is that I feel like I can sort of build up or accrue a history of my reading life, right? Because a great book to me is going to be, you know, could be a terrible book for you, and there's no grading system.
Right.
It's an experiential thing, and so I feel like the more readers understand me and my perspective, they'll be able to sort of align themselves to that. And so by being a consistent reviewer, people will be able to, I think, maybe if they read my stuff on a regular enough basis, understand how they'll approach the book. So it's very different than somebody who's a freelancer for different organizations and things like that. Because you know, I've gotten hate mail before. Somebody said, you know, every book you've recommended I hated, and every book I hated you loved, and I'm like, we have a perfect relationship then.
Right.
Just read my reviews and do the opposite. Like,
Right.
there's no reason for you to be angry at me.
Right.
You know, you've aligned yourself with me, so now I am your ideal book reviewer. You know.
Right.
It's just but books, people get very passionate about books, as you know,
Right.
and so it's something that book reviews can make people very angry. And I think that book reviews can also be written so poorly that that they don't seem to be written for anyone. And I've noticed that sort of creeping into some of the larger outlets. I don't read a lot of book reviews published in national magazines anymore because they seem so airy and disconnected and not aimed at a reader. Maybe they're aimed at the author, maybe they're aimed at the publicist.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I just always think, I mean, what I'm looking for in a book review is some hints. I mean, the things that I'm most interested in, the things that make a great book for me are fabulous writing and dynamic, that is, three-dimensional characters. And I don't care about plot, and I don't particularly care about setting. I just want that wonderful writing. At least writing that isn't wince-worthy,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And so with those two kind of qualifications, I read everything from thrillers to science fiction to literary fiction and nonfiction. And so what I'm looking for in a review are some clues, some key words that will tell me, yeah, the writing's great, or the characters are really three-dimensional, you know. And I think the really good book reviewers like you convey, you're welcome, convey that sense. You know, so many of the national book reviews rely so heavily on telling you what the book is about, and they never tell you what it is about the book that you will like or not like.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the things I hate about the New York Times book review when I read it is the reviews of the nonfiction, the biographies that go through and just basically spill the beans on all the salacious parts. And it's just basically a book report. It's a seventh grade book report where you're like, here are the things you'd want to read about this book.
Right.
Now you don't have to.
Right. Good for cocktail party chatter if one went to cocktail parties, which
exactly.
I do not.
It's good for faking the experience of
Right.
reading the book. But I mean, and you know, the things you look for in a book aren't the same things as somebody. I know I've met people who
Right.
read historical fiction mostly, it seems like, for the detail of the history, and there are people who are plot freaks who only want to
Totally.
read about plot.
Totally.
So you can't aim for any one particular reader. I think the thing that a lot of book reviewers forget, and the thing that I think is so amazing about book reviewing, is it's the only form of criticism where you're responding in the same form as the art you're critiquing. Visual artists don't paint responses to paintings, you know, and nobody's.
Wow, that would be so interesting.
It would be very interesting,
Yeah.
and I would like to encourage that. You know, I'd love to see a
Right.
dance recital in response,
Right.
but I think that that's a great responsibility, and I think that it's important for a book review to be a beautiful piece of writing on its own, something that you can read without ever even necessarily wanting to read the book and get something out of it. It needs to be a work of art because you are responding to a work of art in the same format, and that's just a huge responsibility, and it's something that I don't think a lot of reviewers get. I think sometimes people get a little too academic with things, and they want to. They focus on one thing or the other, and it becomes a sort of thing that's not useful to you unless you've already read the book, which is kind of ridiculous. And I come from a book-selling background. I worked at Elliott Bay Book Company for 8 years, and so I think some of that comes off onto my work also, where you want to describe the book, but you don't want to ruin the book,
Right.
and you want to get people excited for the book or excited about not reading the book on rare occasions, and so you just have to you've got to make the writing work on its own. It's got to have its own structure. It can mimic the structure of the book, which is amazing. You know, I've read book reviews that I think are better pieces of writing than the books themselves, and that's always amazing when that happens. I love it because it's just something that you can't get in any other form of criticism.
Are there book reviewers that you rely on particularly, or have a greater amount of respect for?
I mean, there are people who I enjoy, I enjoy James Woods, and I'm always excited when Colson Whitehead writes a book review, because he comes from an alt-weekly background, and I think he knows how to make a review exciting and a good piece of writing and not lose his voice. And he's also not afraid to throw a few grenades when he feels the need. He did a great one of Richard Ford 20 years ago that really colored my experience with Richard Ford.
Right, I was just going to say that's what a review can do. It can really change the way you as a reader interact with those books.
Yeah, and that's a huge responsibility
Yes,
too,
it
because
is.
if you aim it at the wrong person, or if you aim at an unworthy target, then you can ruin an author for somebody
Right.
who loves that author.
Right.
Richard Ford, I think, maybe was asking for it. He later famously spat on Colson Whitehead at a cocktail party, one of
Right.
those cocktail parties
Yeah,
neither of us
right.
go to. I think that was a sign that maybe he didn't receive the intervention in the spirit that it was intended.
Well, have you ever heard from an author that you have? Because I had the experience when I did when I wrote a review, and I believe it was for the Seattle Times years ago, and I said that I had been a big fan of this author's and listed, talked about some of the books, and then I said, but this one was a huge disappointment to me, and blah blah blah, and he wrote to me, and he said. I mean, it was the most gracious letter. He said, "I am so sorry I disappointed you."
Oh.
I mean, and it was just wonderful. I mean, he, I think, understood, but maybe we need to say it again and again and again, that different readers, every reader reads a different version of the book, because you bring everything to your reading, all your life you bring to the reading of every book that you do. It's
Absolutely.
so personal.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, I love Roger Ebert's film criticism, but the thumbs up, thumbs down thing really
Right.
did a number on criticism, I
Yeah,
think.
right.
In addition to the sort of waning of print media with letter grades on all the
Right.
reviews and things like that.
Right.
But, so yeah, I think that a negative review of something that somebody loves, or an author that's put a lot of work into a book, can feel damaging, damning, and people respond to it. I've gotten hate mail from authors.
Really?
I've gotten a few really gracious, generous emails from authors whose books I've written about. I've also gotten just off the hinge crazy emails from authors whose books I wrote positive reviews of, and they focused on the one line where I was like, this book
Right.
wasn't as good as this book.
Right.
And it would start an exchange, and I sometimes I've written back, don't write me again, please.
Yeah.
And I've seen other reviewers publish those, and authors should probably not respond to reviewers in general.
Right. I think it's a losing game.
It is. It
You know.
is, and some reviewers are malicious in intent, but you have to operate from the assumption that they're working from a place of helpfulness, and if you're going to respond, it's best to respond with that assumption, I think.
Right. One of the book reviewers that I have great admiration for, and really always enjoy his reviews, and even though I might not always agree with them, but I just think he does a fabulous job, is Ron Charles of the Washington Post.
Yes.
And I mean, he's somebody who reads the book and really cares about it, and really, I think, confronts, which I think a book reviewer has to do, difficult issues about the book. Not saying, oh, don't read this if you don't like blah, 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 but when he talked about the woman who lost her soul, the Bob Shakocious
Yes.
big book, which I admired, and I thought it was just a wonderful book. But he talked about the issues. I think at that time he was on the National Book Critics Circle judge award committee or something, and you know how you judge a book that has very difficult subject matter, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the great ones, and he's one of the few on the national level who I really trust. And that doesn't mean I agree, as I said, with everything that he says, but I trust him to come from a good place, like I was saying.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The other thing that just incenses me about the world of books in general these days are the blurbs from author, you know, the back of the book blurbs, or the publicists who compare, you know, this is a book, if you liked Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird and Mayor Levin's The Compulsion and, you know, Miranda July's the First Bad Man, you'll love this new book by blah, blah, blah. I mean, the books have nothing in common, and they're just like pulling them out of the ether.
And jaws are always dropping, and people are always astonished, and it's like I imagine these people as like toddlers walking around being like dazzled by the world, like the sky. And it's
book.
their lives are changed every time they open a book, which is great, I guess, but not very trustworthy. I think blurbs have gotten out of hand. Gary Steingart blurbed everything, and then he made fun of himself for blurbing everything. I think he's getting back to blurbing everything.
I think
again.
so. I was just going to say, but I don't think he's changed his ways.
Yeah, and it's something that that is a problem because it damages trust, I think. It's certainly, I understand you want to help your friend, but whenever I read a blurb now, I try to triangulate where they're coming from. Did they go to Iowa?
Exactly.
You know,
I do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Because it just, you know, I say, it's another Brooklyn hipster, you know, blurbing another Brooklyn hipster's book, or
if it's a great writer, it could be one of their students.
Or one of their students, right? Or yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And not to say that the book isn't great, but I just don't trust that connection.
Yeah.
And so it's something that is happening. I think it's happening more and more. It's always been a problem. But the praise, the love is getting a little out of hand.
The love that dare not speak its name.
It's getting so.
Your book.
It's getting so the only blurber you can trust is Thomas Pynchon, because he stays away from everyone. So his blurbs are always a big deal. He's actually led me to a couple of really great authors because I can trust that. As a recluse, he doesn't interact with the authors.
Right. Yeah. Do you consider your column, your books column, do you consider yourself, this is a weird question, but I'm going back to like the first thing you said, that you sort of see your column as being like on a continuum, so people who read it can follow your reading and see that development, and that's just a wonderful way to. It's a wonderful mechanism for personal growth, don't you think? I mean, it's like you're a columnist who. Who can look back and say, "Oh yeah, I reviewed this book and I liked it."
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that works out really well for me, because I have a fairly boring life. Other writers at The Stranger are going to rock shows and everything. I go to maybe a movie, but I'm almost always at home in bed reading. Every night, and that's great if I'm not going to a reading at a bookstore. And So my life is not that exciting, and I think in a lot of ways the most exciting part of my life is what I read, and I think that's a great life. I'm very happy with that life, and so it's very interesting. It's like a diary, and even though it's not full of personal events. I can follow my life and like, oh, I was working on this at that time in my
Right.
life, you know, and I was interested in this, or I was worried about this political thing happening. And so it's to me, it's kind of an embarrassingly in-depth autobiography that I've written, and which is a little weird in retrospect, but also very neat. And I also try to chronicle what happens in Seattle, and the amazing book scene that we have here, because, you know, there's Marianne Gwynn at the Times, who is great, and who I like a lot, but she and I are it in the city, which is just sort of heartbreaking. The Seattle Weekly doesn't run reviews that often. City Arts has a readings calendar, but it's very small. And every once in a while they'll feature an author, but they don't have a regular book section. And I'm not, you know, I understand the economics of a book section is
Right.
not the most robust part of a magazine. But I think in a city like Seattle, where you have multiple readings every night, where you
Right.
have so many amazing arts organizations and bookstores that stay open and do better every Christmas, which is you know, a miracle in America in 2015. I think that you're not chronicling the city's arts if you're not keeping keeping a finger on the pulse of the literary scene on a regular basis.
Well, how do you choose what books to review?
Well, I'm very lucky in that I get to choose wherever my interests are. Nobody tells me what to read, which is amazing. But I try to focus on a mix of national and local books. I try to time them for upcoming readings, events that my readers might like to know about. I also like to highlight local personalities. You know, even sometimes if they're not working on anything of their own, it's just good to remind people, hey, this writer is out here in Seattle doing work, and has been for a long time and should be recognized. So I get, I'm sure you get a lot more than me. I get anywhere from a half dozen to 24 books a day in the mail, depending on the season. And I just go through them. Some of them I take home. I have a bookshelf in my house that is chronologically ordered, and it moves up, and there's always a culling, and it always hurts. And
Right.
but it's just pretty much what I think my readers need to know about that week, which is sometimes it's a difficult choice to make because there's so
Right.
much going on,
Right.
especially in the spring and the fall,
Yeah.
the busy times. Last year, the year before last, I realized that I counted all of the male authors and female authors I'd reviewed, and there were a lot more male authors. And so last year I made an effort to read more female authors. I kept a checklist by my desk, and I every time I reviewed one, somebody called it my creepy serial killer list at work because it said M and F with little hashtags underneath it. But I feel like that was important. Representation was important
Right.
because I'm a white guy and I'm reviewing books, and as I said, so much of it is about my experience that the very least I can do is review books that cover other experiences, you know. So this year I'm trying to do even better and to focus on people of color and you know, LGBT issues and things like that, because I think that's maybe one of the most important things I can do as a reader is to reach out and understand the experience of other people around me.
One of the things I was thinking about, because of the events that just happened in France and the awful killings of the Charlie Hebdo people, I was thinking about Alistair Horn's book about the French-Algerian War, and how interesting that would be to read and to review, because the killers of the cartoonists and the other members of the team in Paris were Algerian. They were Algerian refugees. And so I always think, you know, there's so many wonderful books that would help explain the present, you know, but you know, there are just more books to review than you could ever in your life get to.
Yeah, and something that I thought would happen with the internet and with all the ebooks on Project Gutenberg, everything, you know, everything that's ever been published that's in the public domain is available. I thought there would be more sort of book archaeologists who are digging back into all of these great old books that have sort of disappeared, or even mid-list books from 7 years ago that disappear. One of the unfortunate, I think, limitations of my job is that I sort of have to stay on the front list and stay on, because that's the authors are doing interviews for the books that are out now. And so I agree that would be great. Generally, when something like that happens, like with the interview thing in North Korea, the best I can do sometimes is look back at books that I have read about, like North Korea, like Barbara Demick's Nothing to Envy, and Guy Delisle's comic Pyongyang about working in North Korea, and send people that way. But I'm kind of like a shark in that I have to keep moving forward. I don't have time to go backward. I wish that I could. I think that would be an amazing resource, and something I'm surprised that people aren't doing more of.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I could see that as a column somehow written by somebody, not me.
500 words.
500 words, right? Yeah, right. So, what's some books that you're eagerly looking forward to for 2015 that you know are coming down that you're definitely going to review, or if you can say that sort of thing?
Well, I don't have very much of a long view. I'm basically trapped in this 4-week window, 2 weeks leading up to an event, 2 weeks after. So in the near future, I'm looking forward to Kelly Link's book. Ryan Boudinot, local author, has a book of short stories coming out soon, and I've seen an advance copy, and it's amazing. He worked with Fantagraphics Books, local comic book publisher.
Great. I love their work.
Yeah, and he designed it so it's square and it's very thin, and there's a lot of graphic design mixed in. It's not a comic book; it's prose short stories. But it's just gorgeous, and it's weird, and I think it's going to pop a lot of lids when it comes out, because it doesn't look like a lot of the books that are published in New York, a lot of the short story collections we're used to. So I'm interested in the reception for that, because it's a very Seattle book. It's the sort of book I think that could only happen in Seattle, and it's going to be distributed everywhere, and I think it could get some really interesting reception. That's out this fall.
Oh, not till this fall.
Not till this fall.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh, Paul, I feel like there's so much we didn't have a chance to talk about that maybe you'll come back sometime and we'll talk more.
Anytime. This has been great. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.